Hi everybody. Greetings from Sydney. We all wish that we were in one place at one time, of course, but the main thing is that I hope that we're all well and safe and coping as well as we can in strange times, strange remote times. It's great to be part of this event. Thanks to Andrew Shikiar and team. I've been watching FIDO for a long time. I think that the FIDO Alliance is the most important thing that has ever happened in our industry, and it gives us an amazing opportunity to shift the agenda. FIDO has been quietly consumerizing authentication and training people to think about identity and, in fact, authentication in a whole new way, quietly but slowly, and doing a great job. Now, I think that the future of identity lies in authentication and it lies in data quality. So I'm going to spend today talking about how we can take the patterns and protocols and models that we've got now for authentication and apply them on a really big stage and look at a much bigger problem than identity and working out who's who on the internet. So thanks for joining us today. A quick trip down memory lane. We have been doing identity for such a long time. 30 years ago, the Australian government toyed with a national identity card. Now, Australia, the United States, Canada, the UK, New Zealand. These countries remain allergic to the idea of national identity, and every now and again, we try a national identity and the public tends to reject it. And it leaves us perplexed and confused, and it leaves the digital identity crowd on very unstable foundations. And it's been difficult for us to have a conversation about identity. I think the problem is the words that we use, and hopefully I'm going to start to shift the words a little bit in this presentation today. So the Australia card, it was doomed. Not long after that, in internet terms, in fact, at the dawn of the internet, the Australian government tried to establish a national authentication authority. The documents are still online, and if you review those documents, the problem framing of authentication and identity over 20 years ago hasn't much shifted. We saw Identitrus, a massive financial services attempt to monetize identity, and in fact, technically, to figure out ways of monetizing identification risk. InfoCard, wonderful presentation, and we're seeing history repeat itself a little bit, as we'll see. InfoCard was an attempt to bring out verified credentials literally in a wallet presentation on a laptop or a device. The United Kingdom tried with the national identity card again during the Blair government. NSTIC, the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, never a national identity of any sort, but of course it was often confused as such. NSTIC has recently folded after spending a lot of money on a bunch of really interesting pilots. Unfortunately, the NSTIC vision, which was that, if I remember right, the vision was for a student to be able to log on in the morning with her student card, do her banking, check her health records and go to school. We never got anywhere close to that sort of vision. It's interesting to wonder why. Gov.uk Verify, essentially the same sort of mindset, the same sort of thing that we're trying in Canada and Australia as well. An attempt to foster a sustainable marketplace of identity providers and relying parties. It turns out that without government intervention in places like Scandinavia and India and the Baltics, the market left to itself struggles to come up with a sustainable identity model. And we heard from Jeremy Grant recently and some colleagues who say that the role of government is turning out to be to provide verifiable signals and verifiable APIs, and to be a little bit more interventionist, because left to itself, the private sector, they're doing authentication really well, FIDO Alliance, but we're not doing identity. I think we've got to stop doing identity. I think we're going to have to shift the agenda onto something that's both simpler and more elegant, but also much bigger and more purposeful. So the state of play right now is that there's two large identity frameworks, policy frameworks that are well developed in Australia and in Canada. Whether or not these initiatives lead to a sustainable marketplace of identity providers is yet to be seen, and I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen until we shift the agenda. Dave Birch, wonderful payments and identity advisor and analyst from the UK, has called this out in no uncertain terms. We're getting nowhere on digital identity as currently framed. And meanwhile, identity theft and deep fakes and authenticity is spiraling out of control. What's authentication really all about? It's really about Alice and Bob trying to work out who they are classically, and there's a whole bunch of ways of doing that. There's a whole bunch of signals that are available: customer reference numbers, one-time passwords, digital signatures, cryptography. You know what? It's all data. And a little epiphany I've had recently about digital identity is that digital identity can't be anything other than data. It's all we got. So we've got just ones and zeros. Now, you may think that in real life you're dealing with me, my flesh and blood identity, my curated identity, the way that I express myself. But you know what? It's all still data. Right now, I'm coming to you via Zoom. How do you know that I'm real? And in a few years' time, this is going to be a real issue. You're not going to know that I'm real unless we step in and do something about this. Now, we have the tools. We have settled in the last 10 or 15 years. That long journey I talked about has been very purposeful. It's been slower than we hoped, but it's landed in a place where we have some fantastic technologies and protocols. Verifiable credentials is the hot topic, now being standardized by the World Wide Web Consortium as VC, verified credentials. And Hyperledger is one of the distributed technology projects that's turning its mind to the same issue. Wallets are hot. The InfoCard selector, going back, what, I think it was nearly 15 years, was a precedent. Self-sovereign identity at the moment is dominated by the mental model and the user experience of a wallet. And of course, we're all accustomed to this with Apple wallets and Google wallets and Samsung Pay. So that consumerization of the identity experience is turning out to be a credentials experience in a wallet. Decentralized identifiers, relatively new. It's the latest incarnation of bring your own identity and the self-sovereign idea that people should take responsibility, they should take charge of their own identity. It's a bit of a do-it-yourself, independence, libertarian kind of move. It's very political, and I get that. It is about reclaiming control. The big question is identity something that you can effectively control, given the enormous powers that are out there in the digital economy? The important thing about the important thing about distributed decentralized identifiers is that they come with a new protocol, the DID document, which I think is actually a lightweight digital certificate all over again. Digital certificates, PKI, have always been unwieldy, incredibly expensive in terms of compute and policy. The DID document is a lovely, lightweight, when it's expressed with keying material and digitally signed by a DID issuer or a credential issuer, it's a really nice little lightweight public key certificate. Now, where does this meet with the Internet of Things, with devices and with device-to-device authentication, the automation of the world? The IoT is certainly picking up authentication. Great to see that there's an IoT working group within the FIDO Alliance, and you've been hearing about that in the conference so far. Microsoft with Azure Sphere, putting into a small compact operating system the sorts of authentication protocols and cryptographic capabilities that we all need to be able to get quality data. So that's what's hot. This is allowing us to revisit what authentication is all about. At the dawn of electronic commerce, the APEC Electronic Authentication Working Group settled on a functional definition of authentication, the means by which the receiver of a message works out whether the message is good enough for them or not. Do they know where it's come from? Can they trust the sender? So authentication boils down to three basic questions. What do I need to know about you in order to transact with you? Where am I going to get that information? And how am I going to know if it's true or true enough for my purpose? These are the sorts of relying party decisions that have been occupying us in identity protocols and trust framework developments now for, as we've seen, for 20 years. Let's look at the credit card as as the first example, really, of a verifiable credential. The lingo these days, the language about verifiable credentials, is in fact repeating and reiterating the things that have been baked into card auth now for a very long time. So those three questions again: what do I need to know? Where will I get that knowledge? How will I know if it's true? For card auth, the thing I really need to know is the primary account number. Now think about it. What we do when we change that card not present, we throw a whole lot of other extraneous authentication signals, those one-time passwords and all those things that we talked about before, in order to bolster your confidence in the primary account number. That's all you need to know. And it's a crying shame that we've got to the point of throwing so much other personal information, knowledge-based authentication, that we've lost sight of the fact that a credit card transaction is really pretty simple. So where do you get the credit card number? In a card present transaction, you get it from the chip. We used to get it from a magnetic stripe. Now we get it from a chip. The reason why we get it from a chip is that it provides provenance and fidelity for the data. So you know that the chip number is true. The cardholder has put in a PIN to unlock the card, so you know that the card is in the right position. We're using PKI, we're using digital certificates in the chip, and we're using mutual authentication between the chip and the terminal to prove that the chip is right and that the PAN has been issued by a legitimate bank that's part of the scheme. So that chaining of trust comes from the PKI that sits behind the chip cards. As I say, I think the chip card is a pure and prototypical version of what we call verified credentials today. Now, I've already touched on some of the evolution of this stuff, and this is really interesting. The evolution of the technology that we use to convey an authentication signal. This all started with the paper Diners Club card in 1955. They evolved slowly to mag stripe. IBM, I think it was, introduced the first magnetic stripe in about 1970. The godfather of the magnetic stripe card, a guy called Jerome Spiegels, said that the magnetic stripe card has got a, what did he call it? He said it has a learning curve of 1, meaning that you use a magnetic stripe card once and it's with you forever. That user experience that we have of swiping a card, or in fact now dipping a card, or even tapping a phone, that user experience, the consumerization of payments, is something that we're now seeing in the consumerization of authentication. Now, we introduced a number of other tricks on the magnetic stripe card. We introduced barcodes and holograms and tamper resistance. We went to chip in the early 2000s. We, meaning Europe first, of course. Australia followed fairly quickly. And now we're in mobile phones. We're in smart technologies, which cryptographically are exactly the same as what's in the smart card. I've recently written a paper that suggests that we can use the good old CMM, the capability maturity model, to map the evolution of data carriers like this. And what's happening behind the scenes is super important. So the network business model, two-sided marketplace of issuers and relying parties, issuers of data, consumers of data, that relying party two-sided model has been with us now since 1955. And it's something that the identity industry is just about now ready to embrace. The story swung onto automation once the business model was settled. The business model, by the way, is unchanged while this technology evolves. Over 50, 60, 70 years, the stability of the business model, I think, is absolutely a power of nature in business. So on top of the business model, we started to automate the capture of the data using ones and zeros in the mag stripe. We then became interested in provenance, like how do you know that the card is genuine? So there's the CVV on the back of the card. There's other tricks, of course, the hologram, the variable printing, to allow a merchant to know that the card is real, the data carrier is genuine. We went from physical provenance to digital provenance with transaction signing. So now, because there's a private key unique to the card holder, unique to the chip, buried in the chip, if a transaction is digitally signed, you can be sure that the transaction came from a chip, a real chip, a chip that's been vouched for by the card issuing bank, and it's part of the scheme. You have that cascade of trust thanks to the public key infrastructure. And now we have intelligence. We have got smart devices that provide even better proof of provenance, proof of possession. You can tell if a virtual credit card now is still in the right hands, thanks to biometrics and behavioural and geolocation. It has to be said that not everybody is moved at the same rate, and that the social security card today in the United States really uses the same technology that's 70 years old in the original Diners card. Now, I'm not making pot shots here at the US, and a lot has been said about how the social security number has unfortunately become an authenticator instead of a simple index number. And I agree with all of that. But I also observe that the basic system of using a social security number to index your social security records is probably not much broken. We have to stop reusing the social security number, but we also need to attend to the provenance of the social security number. And gee, it would be a good idea if all we did was to put a chip in that paper card and replay some of that evolution that we're seeing from CMM1 through to CMM2 or 3. The Australian Medicare card is another favourite whipping horse. The Medicare card hasn't changed much for 30 years. And every now and again in Australia, we try and update the magnetic stripe to a chip, and all hell breaks loose. We sadly don't have the maturity in Australia yet to be able to deal with this issue, that there's data and there's identity, and we can separate them. And we can use chip technology to carry that data in a better way without reinventing identity and without, in fact, introducing anything that's remotely like an Australia card. If we just put a chip in our card, just like we have in banking. Now, we're jumping over this. Somebody asked me recently about this model. They said, is there going to be a CMM6? And I think maybe there is. I think CMM6 may come with the Internet of Things. And what you've got there is a Microsoft Azure certified IoT device, a microcontroller running the Azure Sphere operating system, heaps of cryptography, heaps of power, a little trusted platform module that keeps all of the cryptography safe and secure and trustworthy. And if we can follow this track of protecting the provenance and fidelity and truthfulness of data into the Internet of Things, then the possibilities become absolutely enormous. We have this contested metaphor about data as the new crude oil. Data is clearly a raw material. Now, we can get philosophical about whether it's truly fungible or not. It doesn't matter. What I want to do is to emphasize that data is the lifeblood of the economy. Just like oil, it's really, really technical. Understanding data, understanding cryptography, it's like understanding petrochemical chemistry. This is hard stuff. So it becomes asymmetrical. So it means the people that are controlling oil, the people that are controlling data, are making fantastic amounts of money, and they are inviting, they're calling for, they're demanding, in fact, new regulations, new models of jurisprudence. The history of oil is uncannily like the history of data. This is Arlington Beach in California, less than 100 years ago. And in fact, if you look at some of the historical pictures in the 60s, the California beaches are hellholes. Now, what did we do? We haven't made oil go away. We're digging up more oil than ever. This is Arlington Beach, California today. This is what oil looks like today. Our kids pump it from gas stations, but you don't buy oil on the corner of the street. You don't buy gasoline out of jerry cans in the United States. You go to licensed service stations. This is highly regulated stuff for safety and for economic reasons and for user experience. We don't think about this anymore because we have been trained to understand how the whole petrochemical supply chain has become orderly. Here's another part of this metaphor that just keeps on giving, the quality assay. I don't suspect that many people have gone and bought crude oil recently, and I certainly haven't, but I've been studying this stuff and the chemistry and the questions that a buyer of raw bulk crude oil asks about the quality of their product run deep and technical, and it's an assay. So if data is the new crude oil, or if data is important, why aren't we assaying data? Why aren't we providing the buyers of data or the consumers of data reliable signals about the origin of the data? How old is it? I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about the data itself. Where did the data come from? What's its quality? What's its intended purpose? Think about GDPR and this weird challenge that we have that data has got to be permission, it's got to have T's and C's. There's special sorts of data, there's personal data, there's biometric data. What's it for? What permissions attached to it? What jurisdiction does it play in? And at the end of the day, how has it been carried? We have seen that there's a difference between a credit card number that's carried on a paper card or a magnetic stripe card or in your smartphone. The number is the same, the business model is the same, but the way that the data is carried makes a hell of a lot of difference to the quality and reliability. Now, we've got the ability now, thanks to the identity protocols, to extend authentication out to the entire data economy. Have a look at the pattern that we are now used to, we the identity. We're used to this pattern now of an identity issuer, a subject, a wallet to keep that identity in, and a relying party. We have been trying to have a marketplace that will support multiple issuers, multiple relying parties in an ecosystem. The thing now is that subjects are not necessarily just human beings. Subjects can be things, and we're not carrying wallets. We're using secure elements to hold those keys. And the issuers might be industrial, and the relying parties themselves may also be things. So think about connected cars and smart infrastructure. Think about the provenance of food and medications, and think about the different sorts of claims that need to be made, not just about people, but the claims that are being made about things in the data economy. It's almost as if our verified credentials, models and protocols and solutions have been made for this future economy. So we could put it together in a different way. We could take the certificate authorities, the directories, the card management systems, the personalization bureaus that are now well established to support things like credit cards and passports and smart cards. And we could repurpose these things to be provisioning all sorts of data to all sorts of subjects and key carriers, such that when a relying party wants to know something about a person or a car, or if you want to know the warranty of a piece of medical equipment, or if you want to know the provenance of the bananas, a relying party can ask those questions. And what we're building up towards here is authenticity. For many, many years, a good friend of mine, Michael Casey, in the blockchain community, talks about the original sin of the internet, meaning that we're missing an identity layer. All sorts of people. Kim Cameron talked about the identity layer. His entire blog is about the identity layer. I think what we need to shift to is an authenticity layer. I think the idea that you need to know who somebody is and what their credentials are can be broadened and generalized into the authenticity of everything in the data economy. So that's how powerful our identity constructs can be. It gives us the power now to treat identity as a real utility in the economy. Identity is a special type of data. This is the thing that energizes me. It's my epiphany in recent years. If it's just data, then we can use our tools, we can build infrastructure to establish the quality of all data, its provenance, its reliability, and ultimately, of course, its value. Thanks heaps. I hope that that's been provocative, and I'd love to carry on the dialogue. Thanks to FIDO. This has been a great event. I really enjoyed it. Let's keep speaking. Cheers.